Do you know why you're here today? To talk about what happened this morning.
I have a question. Do I really have to talk about what happened this morning again? Because I've told people and it just crushes me every time I say it.
Okay.
So I can't really talk about that again.
Okay.
911, what is your emergency?
There was a shootout in my house, and I don't know who's dead, and I'm scared half to death.
I was 10 when all this happened. I was so young and so little.
Is there anybody else in the house with you?
No, I think I'm the only one alive. I don't know, but I'm scared. I want my mom.
I lived with my mother, that's Michelle Conrad. I lived with my stepfather, Brian Conrad, and then my older brother, Zach Doan. I had a dog named Molly. And my stepdad, Brian, was a farmer, and then my mom was also 6 months pregnant.
I so hope my mom is not dead.
That night, I was having a nightmare, and I remember hearing the gunshots in my dream. But when I woke up, it didn't end. The gunshots were actually going off in my house. My mother started screaming and screaming and screaming. I jumped out of my bed, and I went and crouched down by my door. That's when I had heard footsteps. It was very loud. He was stomping. I just remember popping up as fast as I could and just taking 2 leaps back into my bed and just freezing. He fired 2 rounds off at me. I had one of them graze my left leg and my left arm. He turned to my brother's room, and I just remember gunshots going off and my brother moaning. I played dead for 2.5 hours. I was just like, I can't just lay here. I need to do something. So I just proceeded out the door and started dialing 911.
Please, can you just send somebody out
Yes,
here?
somebody's coming, honey. Somebody's coming.
I just couldn't get there fast enough.
I'm cold. I'm very cold.
I could not get there fast enough.
I heard my mom scream.
What in the world could have taken place, and why is she the only one on the phone?
I want my mom. I want my mom.
Robin's home in Pampa, Texas is literally in the middle of nowhere. So you have to wonder, why this family? Why this farmhouse? Whoever the shooter was, whatever his reason for gunning down an innocent family in cold blood, he probably didn't count on one thing. He left behind a witness.
It's on Highway 70. It's about 13.3 miles out from the bowling alley. I have a purple shirt on. I have purple pants on.
It felt so long before they got there.
Okay, they're coming. They're coming. They're
Thank
coming.
you.
I just kept looking and looking and looking and hoping to see, someone coming to my rescue.
All I want right now is my blanket and my pillow.
I'll never forget when I turned down the driveway.
I see him. I see him.
This child on a phone about a shooting. She ran straight to me. I hugged her. As distraught as she was, she's very articulate, just telling me in absolute detail what was going on and what she heard and everything.
He told me everything was going to be okay. They were going to figure it out.
We're obviously not going in the house with her. I got to secure her somehow out here in the middle of nowhere. So I put her in my patrol car and locked it.
All the cops had their guns drawn, and they were going to clear out the house to make sure no one was in there and to go see who was alive and who was not alive.
Any crime scene that you go into, you know, it's the ultimate whodunit. One comment we made when we first got there is, this is like the All-American Family. Everything was in place. The coffee was set to come on the next morning. Mom, dad, children, getting ready for the birth of a child. The east door to the residence had been kicked in, and whoever entered that residence at that time immediately went to shooting. Brian had been shot 3 times, and Michelle had been shot 6 times, and the dog had been shot twice.
I guess I kept playing games with myself in my head. When is my mom gonna walk out of there? When is Brian gonna walk out of there? Where's Molly? I wanted all of my family to walk out of there okay, just like I did.
How that bullet missed Robin, I do not know. It struck a little drawer next to her bed. Zach had been shot 3 times laying in his bed. It appeared Zach never woke up, and Zach never knew what hit him.
I would never ask the question, who's still alive? I wouldn't do it. Like, I just wouldn't do it.
Chief Deputy looked at me, and we looked at each other, and he said, go be with that little girl. And I just wanted to take care of her best I could. I said, is there anything I can do for you, Robin? And she said, I want to feed my animals. And I said, I've fed animals before. Let's go feed animals. Maybe it's just pure survival, you know? Coming from one situation that's just so traumatic to a diversion.
I just remember him helping me feed. I laughed at the amount of alfalfa hay he tried to give my goats because it was like in a large amount, and I said, no, no.
She just blew me away. She completely flipped a switch and was absolutely bragging about her animal got first or second in this, and her brother got first and second with his animal. Once we leave the corrals and that moment's over, the switch flipped again, and it was right back to reality. And she's immediately back to crying and cold, and she grabbed my forearm.
Finally, like, I kind of got the courage to just come right out and say, Mom and Brian aren't gonna walk out of there, are they? Broke the law enforcement people's hearts when they had to tell me no, that they weren't walking out of there. I was the only one that could walk out of there still alive. Zach never woke up, and he never knew what was going on. So I'm thankful that he didn't have a chance to hurt. I'm really thankful for that. Right after it all had taken place, I went to my great-grandma's house. It was just family, after friends, after people, and everybody was crying, and, you know, people were yelling at the top of their lungs, saying, what's going on, what's going on, what's going on? And I couldn't answer questions because I was just scared.
I really don't want to go to sleep anymore. Okay. It makes me to where I'm too scared. I really don't want to go to sleep.
Okay.
So, okay.
I got put in a room with one of the advocates at the bridge. There was a microphone in the room, and there was a camera in the room.
He had shot in my room and missed me. Okay. And so I had to pretend like I was dead for 2 whole hours.
Everything was videotaped to make sure that They had it for evidence and stuff like that.
Did anybody say anything? Could you hear anybody talking?
Nobody talked.
They asked me, what do you remember? Can you describe what he looked like?
I don't know this for sure, but I thought I saw a white eyes, white face.
Okay.
No.
My question to the other investigators was, I need to know if she heard shots, and if so, approximately how many shots did she hear?
And when he shot, I saw a flash.
She never hesitated in her answer of 15 shots. And through the course of the crime scene investigation, 15 fired rounds were found inside the home. Something that you'd hope no 10-year-old getting woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning would have indelibly burned into their memory.
I can't talk about it.
Okay.
It's too heartbreaking.
One of the things that our officers were very concerned about was the safety of Robin. Because you have to remember, at this point, we had no idea who had done this, why it had happened, or where those people might possibly be.
They put us in a shelter kind of thing. It was my biological dad, my stepmom at the time, my stepsister at the time, and myself. You had to be buzzed in. There was cameras all outside of it. I understood that it was for my own safety. I was not allowed to leave except to go to the funeral.
We knew there would be an outpouring of the community at the service, and indeed there was. Everyone loved the Conrads. They were what we would call in the Panhandle salt of the earth kind of people. They were real people that we loved and cared about, and they cared about others.
I just remember sitting there and I would just look at one casket and I'd look at the second casket and then I would turn and I'd look at the third casket and I would do it all over again. It wasn't fair to sit there and look at that.
I was at the funeral. We did have surveillance set up at the church, just looking for suspicious people. No leads were developed through the funeral services.
The anxiety and fear among the community went through the roof. People were afraid that there was somebody on the loose that could actually come into their home and do the very same thing. So people were certainly making sure their doors were locked. People who kept guns in their homes were making sure they were close by.
We're trying to let the evidence speak to us. We had the shell casings. We have a lot of blood evidence. We found several shoe prints. There were some tire tracks that we located on the property.
What investigators didn't have was any DNA or fingerprints. They knew it wasn't a burglary, so they had to look for another motive.
There was one theory that it was a drug hit that had got the wrong house. Well, all the leads were hitting dead ends.
There was no rhyme or reason for why this may have happened. We all sat around and wondered, wow, who did this?
We had no clue who this was. There was no reason for it. Who would do this to this family?
I received a call from a family member trying to reach out to my mother, but was unable to do so. So I called the house and my mother's cell phone. Didn't get an answer, but wasn't alarmed at first. Around lunchtime that day, I decided to leave work and drive to the house to see if I could find them. Once I get to the house, a relative is standing outside, and he tells me that my mother and grandfather had been murdered. My mom was a very loving and caring mother and was my best friend. And my grandfather was always supportive, always there for me. Had just recently lost my father as well. You definitely feel like you've lost everyone in your life.
Orly McCool and Don McCool were the two victims in the house. A relative found Orly McCool lying in the floor with blood, and once I stepped in, I found a bullet casing and saw a shell lying on the floor and saw Miss McCool downstairs.
The shell casings that were there were of a strange, I believe like a Russian ammunition. And it wasn't something you buy at Walmart or somewhere like that. It was a different kind of ammo.
We were looking at the ammo, the shell casings, and one of the other deputies there that does a lot of the crime scenes and said, I just took a burglar report from the night before from Scott King, just lives down the road. Well, Mr. King had reported that his son Levi had come into the house while he was gone and broke into his gun safe and stole several guns. And some of the ammo was the same kind.
Once investigators had recognized those shell casings, they had their suspect, 23-year-old Levi King. Law enforcement knew Levi King well. He had been in prison for burglarizing a neighbor's home and then burning it down. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison, but he served less than 3 before he was sent to a halfway house. He disappeared from that halfway house and was on the run just a week before the bodies of the McCools were found.
So we started trying to piece stuff together. One of the family members also said that the Orly and Don McCool's pickup, Dodge Dakota pickup, was gone, so it was entered into the computer system nationwide as stolen.
We had a warrant signed for Levi at, I want to say like 11 o'clock that night, and that warrant was issued in the computer for nationwide pickup.
None of us knew why this had happened. It did feel completely random. Law enforcement had kept us abreast of the situation and had informed us that they had identified Levi King as a suspect. He needed a way to, escape the area. And so they believed that he had targeted my grandfather's house as well as the truck for transportation.
Levi King was found in the truck by the Border Patrol in El Paso. He admitted having guns in the back. Well, that drew their attention. They ran the tags, found out there was a stolen truck with a possible suspect from a murder inside, so they detained him there at El Paso PD and actually interviewed him.
So El Paso police held and questioned Levi King until the Missouri investigators could arrive. Just 15 minutes into that interview, Levi King calmly confessed to killing Orly McCool and his daughter-in-law, Dawn, but he couldn't fully explain why.
Before I even realized it, I had just pointed it at him and fired.
How many times did you fire?
Just once. He spun and fell over.
You walk by to the door and you see this woman. Why, explain to me why you shot at her.
I was scared. I didn't know what was gonna happen to me. I was panicking.
We get to El Paso PD. We are met by the detectives that are working the case. I observed Levi standing there, knew him, said his name. He knew who I was. We both acknowledged each other. We loaded him up in the pickup up and headed back towards Missouri. During a conversation with Levi, he described that even hours later, he could still smell the gunpowder, the sweat, and the blood, describing it as a feeling that was probably better than any drugs he'd ever done. I want to say within the next week or two, I had been told by a couple of the detention officers there in the jail that Levi had asked to see me and speak with me. We got him out of the cell, took him to the outdoor exercise yard, and somewhere in that conversation, within the next few minutes, Levi made the statement, "You know there's 4 more in Texas." At a point in time, Levi King says, "You know there's 4 more in Texas." I didn't know whether to believe him, to not believe him. He'd been in our jail for approximately 2 weeks, and nobody was hunting him, nobody was questioning him, so I don't know why he made that statement. Describing the location of the murders, he talked about the big cross in Texas. I knew exactly where he was talking about. There's only a couple that are that big that stand out like that.
So Don Ruby reached out to investigators near that cross in the Texas Panhandle to see if there were any open homicides. There were. The murder of Robin's family. It didn't take long to piece everything together. After killing the McCools and driving 500 miles, Levi King decided it was time to kill again.
The phone call that we received from the Pineville Sheriff's Office in Missouri blew open the case for us. We find out that Levi had gone in and killed Orly and Don McCool and taken their vehicle and driven down through Oklahoma to Interstate 40. At some point in time, Levi decides that he's going to exit the interstate and looks over and sees the farmhouse belonging to the Conrads and pulls in, kills Brian and Michelle and Zach, and shoots at Robin, thinking he's killed Robin. If there was ever a case where a man deserved to die, it was Levi King.
But first, Levi King would have to face justice in Missouri for the McCool murders. There, he took a plea deal. To avoid execution, he agreed to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. In Texas, he also took a guilty plea, but the DA refused to take the death penalty off the table.
The purpose of this trial was only to see what sentence he was going to get. It was about whether he was going to be executed or whether he was going to go back to Missouri and spend the rest of his life in prison.
I was 14, about to turn 15, when trial was taking place. I understood that we were in court for the death penalty. You know, I told them, okay, he did this to my family, so yeah, okay, go for it.
Always in death penalty cases, what you don't want the jury to be stuck with is this picture of a person as a killing entity, an evil entity. The first thing we had to figure out how to do was to turn Levi from a monster into a human being.
Are you Levi Alexis King?
Yes, sir, I am.
Levi had been bipolar at least since adolescence. At varying times, he had other diagnoses for depression, for bipolar with some amount of psychosis. And then I believe at some points in time, he had a schizophrenia diagnosis.
Levi King was one of 7 children. Early on, he showed signs of serious antisocial behavior, setting fires and killing animals. And drug use in his home was rampant. His father introduced him to hard liquor and marijuana, and by his teens, Levi King had moved on to meth and heroin. And the place he called home, you'd have to see it to believe it.
The environment in which he grew up in, and just the overwhelming poverty and despair. Until we went up there and actually walked around in it, you just could not get a feel for it. It was truly frightening. The first thing you noticed was just filth. The insulation was just black and melted. There was one wall that just had this massive display of ceremonial knives and swords. There was lots of guns and knives, and, you know, regardless of whether they had food or not, they had money for ammunition.
The defense did a very good job to paint Levi as this poor, pathetic, mistreated, sad little person. There's a whole lot of other people out there in this world that have grown up in the same type of environment that Levi did, or even worse than Levi did, and they don't go on killing sprees. Levi King kills people because he likes the smell of blood. He kills people because he likes that smell of gun smoke. He doesn't care.
I was going to be sitting in front of a murderer who had killed my loved ones. And to testify, I didn't want to, but I knew that I needed to for my family's sake. I was the only one that got to walk out of that house. They didn't, and they needed a voice too.
Before she goes in to testify, she's absolutely scared to death. I just look at her and I said, Robin, we've got your back. Go do what you need to do, tell the truth, and just realize we're right outside this door. He will never get to you.
I tried to avoid looking at Levi King as long as I possibly could, and finally I couldn't resist the urge anymore because I wanted to see who had actually done this. And so I looked at him, and the stare that I got back was the worst feeling of my entire life. He is very cold, he's very blank, and essentially it just felt like he was staring a hole right through me.
When Robin testified, the hard part about Robin testifying was to see the pain that precious little girl had to go through and endure. And then to see her say, I've endured this, but you're not taking my life away from me. I am not giving you that kind of control.
I don't want to live with being bitter and being angry all the time for what had happened. I did forgive Levi King because me forgiving Levi King, it was my sense of peace, and it was my sense of this is how I was raised, and this is my family coming out.
We present the evidence, the defense has their time to present their case, and we asked 12 people to make a very, very difficult decision to either take or not take a man's life. You ask the question, why, and that's the question that sometimes haunts you forever. Why? Why this family? Why this day? Why this time? We may never know.
Probably the hardest part for people to deal with on these types of crimes, the randomness of it, the lack of motive, is to understand that there truly are people out there who are just plain evil. Levi King is one of those people. I'm asking 12 people to sentence this man to death.
This was a horrible crime, and we knew we had to be honest with the jury. We tried to get to him and say, look, he will never walk as a free man, ever. That is punishment, and he will never harm anyone else again.
For years, I lived and breathed this case. And despite your best efforts, you don't always get it right. The jury deliberated for approximately 7 to 8 hours, and they came back and said that they wanted to give him life without parole. One of them wanted to give him life without parole. The rest of them wanted him to have the death penalty.
I credit that with giving the eventual one holdout enough strength to hold out. I don't think we ever believed we'd get a life verdict. I thought the best we would get would be a hung jury.
Just the look on Lynn's face that almost looked like that she had failed us, but she really didn't. Lynn Switzer fought for my family, and that's something I will never be able to thank her enough. And all the law enforcement that was involved and sat on the stand. Either way, ultimately I'd still won, and my family had still won. Levi King would be extradited back to Missouri to serve that sentence. So I was fine with him being in Missouri because Texas is my state. I don't want you back in my state. You've already done your damage here. Pampa is home. It's where my mom and Brian and my dad all raised me. So to leave, I felt like I was being a coward and I was running from my problems and running from what happened. It's not saying that I want to stay there forever, because I don't.
Robin tries very hard to not be a victim. But occasionally I see glimpses of that scared little girl in Robin.
I really don't want to go to sleep anymore. Okay. It makes me to where I'm too scared. I really don't want to go to sleep.
The fear is still there, and it's still very real. I really hate being alone because I feel like that's when my mind wanders the most, and I think the worst thoughts of what if I could have done this or what if I could have done that? Should I have gone and woke up Zach?
I think it impacts her every day. Robin has to deal with nightmares still. She has to deal with repetitive memory of what happened to her. She told me all the time she remembered her mom screaming. There were times when she'd text me at night and say, you know, I hear things going on, and she was very, very scared whenever noises would happen. And just because she doesn't show it on the outside, I think that she obviously has to deal with it on the inside.
I am very superstitious, I guess. The day that everything happened, I had on socks and I had on long sleeves and long pants. I will not sleep in long sleeves, long pants, or socks now. I will not sleep with my door open because I feel like there's a figure of a person standing in my doorway. I'm scared of the dark. When I walk into the house and I know that I'm there by myself, I will go through every single nook and cranny in the house to make sure that there's no one in there. The dates that are really hard are birthdays. Zach's birthday, Mom's birthday, Brian's birthday. Even my birthday is hard because I don't like celebrating it without them. I just have those days where I want my mommy or want my stepdad or want my brother and want things to go back to being normal, and you just can't help but burst out into tears.
Robin is 21 years old. She's lived off and on with her biological father and an aunt, and now lives with friends. No place has felt like home since the day Levi King walked into her life. Robin briefly tried counseling, but she didn't find it helpful.
I felt like I didn't need to talk to someone. If I wanted to talk to someone, I'll talk to my family, or put a law enforcement person in front of me, I'll talk to you. But a psychiatrist, no thanks. I don't need someone to pat me on the back and tell them, ask me, oh, well, how do you feel? I don't need that. I don't expect you to pity me, and I don't want you to, because that's not how I am. I want to be just like everybody else.
So how does Robin move past the memories of that horrible day? There's a group of people determined to help her. Maybe the only people who really understand what she's been through.
The heroic things that Robin did to survive that day and to survive that incident will always stick in my mind.
When that investigation was through, we weren't through. The law enforcement community surrounded Robin. We wanted to give her a mechanism of people that she could go to if she had questions, if she had issues, if she just wanted to talk. Everybody in the law enforcement field got together and raised funds to start a scholarship program for her. I'm thrilled to death every time that phone rings and I see Robin's name on it. It's always with a sense of joy because she has a special place in my heart, and she always will.
They treated her like their little sister. They just have big hearts. They carry big guns, but they have big hearts. When you go through things as traumatic as this experience was, you have a bond, and I connected with her.
We did keep in contact, and later on, when she turned 16, Robin invited me to her birthday party. I revisit that place, and I've always had this hesitation. Is seeing me a happy day or a tragic day?
I have had a really good relationship with Chad. When I hug him, every time I see him, it's that same hug I got the day that he came and he was the first one to me. And it's just the most heartwarming, it's like a safe place. I don't let what happened keep me down. No. Sorry. That's not me. That'll never be me. I played basketball, I played volleyball, I played softball, ran track, I was a cheerleader. I like being a leader.
Okay, bye. We have had a lot of moments, Robin and I, that we have been together. For prom, she came and got ready at my house. I was, of course, there for her graduation. Just things that I know that she's gonna need a mom for. She says that her mom won't be there for her wedding, and I just wanna be there for her.
I call Denise my adopted mom. I look to Denise for everything, whether it be homework, a new boyfriend, oh my gosh, I don't know what to wear today to school, every little thing to every major thing. That's when I look to Denise.
She has this positive outlook on life. She has one of the most caring hearts that anyone could ever see, and I believe that Robin needs to be in a field with caring and helping people.
I made the statement many times back then, and I still make it today, that I hope the good Lord keeps me around long enough to see why he kept Robin Doan on this earth, because it's got to be an incredible, special reason, and I hope I get to witness that.
I could honestly not tell you why I was left, why I was the only one that survived. I couldn't tell you. Whether it be I'm able to tell people there's nothing that you can't get through. Maybe if I get married one day and have kids, if it's to help my kids get through life or help other people in the world. I don't know. I don't know what my purpose is, but it's gonna be great when it comes.
"48 hours. To miss it would be a crime."
I don't like to go back and think of her at the bottom of the stairs.
Who in Marty's life? Who would have done this?
She was found in a pool of blood. Who has done this to Marty?
I had no idea who could have done it.
Could it have been somebody at work?
Whoever did it was still out there. She's such a good person. Who would do that to somebody? How could anyone do this to my daughter Marty?
I think that day will stay with me forever.
September 8th, 2010 was a normal day at the office. Then there was a 10 o'clock production meeting, and Marty wasn't in it. That was extremely unusual. Marty is very dependable and reliable. Marty is a big bunch of dynamite in a little bitty package. She might weigh 97 pounds soaking wet, but she gets stuff done.
She is a genuine, good-hearted, outgoing, fun person. She is a hard worker, and she's always trying to make everything better.
We work for an apparel company. It's a small manufacturing facility. It's a tight-knit group.
The meeting was over, and I asked, "Where's Marty?" And somebody said, "We don't know." I sent her a quick text, maybe something had come up, no reply to the text. I called her a few times, she never phoned me back. That's why I knew that something was wrong, because she would not just miss work.
There was a real sense of concern, tears. What do we do? What should we do? About 11:30, I decided to drive by her house. When I arrived there, her car was sitting in the driveway. I walked up, rang the doorbell, no answer. Knocked on the door, no answer. So I went back to my car on my cell phone, and I called the office and said, "The house seems eerily empty. I think perhaps you should call the police."
The neighborhood is a very quiet residential neighborhood. We don't get many calls in that area. I went up to the front door. I noticed that the door was closed and not locked. I opened up the door and said, "It's the police department. Marty, are you home?" I said that over and over again. I do notice what appears to be a woman's purse sitting on a table in the kitchen or dining area. Seeing the purse there told me that, I'm married and I have, my wife doesn't go anywhere without her purse. So at that point I was kind of thinking, well, maybe she is here somewhere then. I saw no clues upstairs that would indicate any kind of struggle. And then I started walking down the stairs to the basement. When I got to about 2 or 3 steps from the very bottom, I noticed that there was a person laying on the floor, kind of in a fetal position, covered head to toe in blood, and there was a large amount of blood surrounding this person on the floor. Marty was breathing. It seemed like it was somewhat labored. I knelt down next to her and I asked her over and over again, who did this? Who did this to you, Marty? Who did this to you? I wanted to get, I guess, what could have been a dying declaration if that was what that was going to be.
When I walked in, they had just wheeled her in. I could not tell if it was a man or a woman, couldn't tell if she was young or old, couldn't tell what race she was. It was what appeared to be a lifeless form with dried blood in this swollen head. My first thing was to assess to see had they brought me a live person or not. What we found was the major veins, skin, muscle of the left neck had been completely cut through. And the major artery actually had a couple of scrapes on it, so it's literally millimeters away from having been cut through. For the next hour and a half, we just meticulously cleaned and put back together all of those injuries. I remained still very concerned about her head. In addition to the cut, she had all these bruises and swelling to her face. And head injury to me is something that I take very seriously. Concussions, which is essentially what she had, can lead to swelling, and they can look fine initially and then die 24, sometimes 72 hours later. Some of the nurses were starting to get very quiet and tears were welling up. And then in the back of my mind, I'm going, wait a minute, this happened in my neighborhood. Let me get a call into my wife. Let me find out where my kids are. It starts slowly hitting you in waves, the enormity of what really had happened.
My grandma picked me up and went to the hospital, and they took me straight back to the ICU. I had no idea how serious it was because I wasn't getting a lot of information. I didn't even know what happened. I saw my mom and I started bawling. I didn't recognize her. Her eyes were swollen shut. Her arms, her legs, her hands were the only thing that I could recognize.
I don't know how to describe it other than you just have knots in your stomach and you're in disbelief. Marty's head was swollen like 3 times the size of her normal head. It was just unbelievable. You're kind of in shock that this is your daughter laying there.
My brother, I just know my brother was very angry because it's his mom, it's our mom, but no one can do that to his mom. That just really got him worked up. The fact that both of us, the fact that somebody could just hurt our mom. You can't just try and take our mom away from us. As a teenager, of course, I'd been sassy with my mom, and we got in an argument. Seeing her in that state just made me feel so bad for everything that I had said ever, any little teenager thing. I just wish I could take it all back. I got really close to her, and I said, I will never be mean to you ever again.
When we got to the hospital, some key things that I noticed was that her clothes appeared to be intact. Her bra appeared to be intact, and there was no signs of a sexual assault. Every step of the process, you're looking for some sort of motive. At that time, I was advised her mother had arrived at the hospital, and I went to speak with her to obtain any information we could to assist us with this investigation.
They were asking me if I could think of anyone who might have done this to Marty.
Marty's mother tells us that she has an ex-husband by the name of Steve Hill. She advised us that Marty and Steve, they communicate regularly. Her mother also told us she was a workaholic. She very rarely left the house. To her knowledge, she wasn't dating anybody. And if she was not working, she was typically at home. Marty was still unable to communicate with us. We had very limited information as to who she might have been with, who she may have had recent communication with, and naturally your first thought is possibly the ex-husband might be responsible.
The detectives asked me about my parents. I kept asking, like, do your parents get along? I remember being really defensive. Like, my dad would never do this, and no one that I know would.
We go to Marty's ex-husband's house, Steve Hill, to interview him that night. He was very cooperative, invited us in the house. He gave us the full account of what he had done that day and told us about his history with Marty and that they had had some rough times together, but he loved her and he would never hurt her. He wanted to know who did this just as bad as we did.
And that's where it became very difficult for us. We were stuck with the information of Mr. Hill was not a suspect and very limited after that.
Me and my dad had a lot of conversations trying to get to the bottom and think of who would have done it. Someone had broken into my grandma's house a few days before. Maybe it was the same person, and maybe someone was after our family.
They had bandages over her cuts in her neck, so we really couldn't see them, but we could see the blood coming from her eyes. It was just kind of tears with blood dripping down her eyes. At that point, we still weren't sure what was going to happen. We knew she was fighting to stay alive.
I just remember I started crying and saying, all I want to do is talk to my mom. Like, the only thing I wanted to do is be able to talk to my mom.
There was quite a fear, really, among the office. Could somebody else be a target?
You're looking over your shoulder even at the office, and when you're leaving the office and everywhere you go, wondering who has done this to Marty. And if you know them.
Prairie Village detectives came to the office. Obviously, they're just trying to get a sense of Marty's routine, just looking for any ideas that perhaps would give them a direction in which to turn.
Marty's mother told us that there was a company by the name of B&J Construction who had recently done work at her house who she had actually referred to Marty. She told me that the supervisor of that construction company was named Brian and that he seemed to be a nice guy.
I thought Brian was a hard worker and a family man, and he did good work. Actually, that is why Marty decided to go ahead and use him, because he did some stuccoing inside my house, and he did a really good job.
When I initially called Brian, I didn't even know his last name. He called me back and told me that his last name was Pennington.
He was 26 years old, lived in Leeton, Missouri, approximately an hour and a half from the Kansas City metro area. We decided that we wanted to just ask him some basic questions.
We arrived at Brian's house a little after 9 o'clock p.m. When we initially pulled up, it was a very dark house. It's kind of secluded. When we knocked on the door, we were invited in the house. My partner and I followed Brian into the kitchen. He was very polite, cooperative.
How long did you work at Marty's house?
It's like 3 or 4 days.
What did you think when you heard that Marty got attacked?
I really didn't know what to think. She's a really, really decent lady.
Have you heard what happened to her at all?
No. My mother-in-law was looking on the news channel earlier and it showed pictures of her house and stuff. And I really didn't know what to think.
During this conversation, I noticed that Brian had several scratches on the left side of his face.
Where are the scratches from on your face?
A big dog sitting outside.
What kind of dog you have?
Pit bull.
When did those happen?
Yesterday. She just jumps all over me, and when I bent down yesterday to unhook the chain, she jumped up and caught me in the side of the face.
When I looked at the scratches, they didn't appear to be consistent with what a dog would do. I felt like he was hiding something from me. I asked him if he had attacked Marty. He told me that he had not. He kept stressing to us that he was having financial difficulties and there was no way he could drive to Kansas City to commit this crime due to the fact he didn't have enough money for gas. I talked to Brian's wife, Jessica, in the living room of the house.
Has Brian been here all this week?
I asked her if Brian had been home on the morning of the attack.
He finished that job last month, and he's been here with me for 2 weeks.
Okay. At night?
Night and day.
Night and day.
Yeah,
both.
he ain't going nowhere in the night. I can't sleep at night if he's not here.
She said there was no way that he could have done this attack because he had been with her the entire time. I also asked Jessica about the scratches on Brian's face.
Do you know how he got those?
They're from the dog, I swear.
I did not believe Jessica. She seemed like she was very naive. She was very young. I think she was 20 years old at the time of this. She had 2 young children, and I thought she would say anything possible to help protect her husband and to have him around.
We have no doubt that we're going to find the person that's responsible for this.
Brian doesn't have the heart for that.
I hope so. Believe me, I hope you're right.
I'm just scared. I've never been in this kind of situation.
Yeah, and if you're telling me the truth, you don't have a thing in the world to worry about.
Besides my kids, I know he did work on that house. That's what I'm scared about.
And then I asked Brian if he happened to have any clothes that had blood on them in his house. He immediately told me that he didn't. I asked him if I could look through his clothing, his dirty clothing, and he told me that I could. I saw a hamper in the corner of the bathroom. When I started pulling clothes out, I found a pair of jeans near the bottom of the hamper. When I pulled the jeans out, I immediately saw they were covered in a red stain. Most of the stain was towards the knees and down towards the bottom portion of the pant leg.
You know what this stuff is on the bottom?
Grease.
Grease?
Something, I don't know.
Not blood though, right?
No.
Okay.
When I saw the red stains, it was definitely a moment of, we might have something.
I tried to remain calm and friendly with Brian and asked him if he would give me consent to take the jeans from his house. Brian signed a written consent form that I could take jeans, shoes, DNA swabs, and also pictures of the scratches on his face.
I guess the best word, we were surprised that we were getting this sort of cooperation with the recovery of these items.
I think Brian Pennington thought we would not follow up, we would not do any other investigation, that we would just believe what he said and believe what his wife was telling us. My partner and I drove directly to the crime lab. I think we got there around 11 o'clock at night.
Actually, within 30 minutes of being at the crime lab, we were told that the stains on the jeans tested positive for human blood.
We did not know who the blood belonged to. It could have been anybody's blood at that point, and we would have to wait a couple more days to determine who the blood belonged to. We did not tell anybody about this. We were told that Marty would be able to talk to us eventually. We did not want to interfere with the investigation and have them give Marty ideas. We wanted anything that Marty would say to come directly from Marty and nothing we gave her thoughts or suspicions about. So we were kind of in a holding pattern, waiting to get Marty's side of the story.
And in fact, on that Saturday morning, the morning after leaving Mr. Pennington's house, We were contacted that Marty was talking at the hospital.
I don't remember those first days. I don't remember feeling any pain. I do remember feeling like I had too much medicine in me. I didn't feel good. I believe it was the third day when I started speaking. Suddenly, it all kind of flooded back what had happened. There was no questions. I knew who it was and what he had done.
I remember the day that Marty said her first word. My daughter Monica and I were walking in, and the doctor said she just spoke. As soon as we got in there, we asked her if she could remember who did this. And she said, Brian.
I had gotten up early. I heard a knock at the door. Looking out the window, I saw that it was Brian Pennington, the man that I had hired to do some work on the house. I couldn't really understand for sure why he would be there. It was odd that he was there that early. It was odd that he didn't call first. I went to the door, let him in, and I remember it just being a fairly brief conversation. He mentioned that he remembered something that was in the basement that he thought I should have done. So we started walking to the basement. I was leading. I do remember talking, but I also felt like he was being quiet. Like you would at least say, huh, what, huh, okay. I was getting an odd feeling as we're going down the stairs. And then just 2 steps from the bottom of the stairs, he grabbed my throat. It was very tight and very strong. I kept saying, what are you doing? It was just silence. He never said a word. My voice kept getting lower, softer, and suddenly I couldn't speak. My voice couldn't come out, and I passed out.
We received a call from the crime lab. The blood found on the jeans was in fact Marty Hill's blood.
We knew we had enough for an arrest warrant at that time.
On Monday, September 13th, 5 days after the attack, we go to Brian's house in Leeton, Missouri. We find Brian driving down the road.
He was laid back in the front passenger seat. It appeared his wife was driving.
He was taken into custody at that time.
He showed no signs of being upset. He showed no signs of any anger. There was absolutely no emotion.
When my mom got the call and they told her that they had arrested Brian Pennington, she almost fell over. It was extremely emotional for my mom because she actually referred Brian to Marty. She had actually worked with Brian for 2 years prior to that, knew his wife, knew his kids, and felt that Brian was a safe person. So hearing that they actually had enough evidence to arrest him made it real, that it was really him and that he really did this, and this was a person that she knew.
I believe that Mr. Pennington is an evil person. One of the theories we have in this investigation is not only did Mr. Pennington strangle Marty initially, it's our belief that he then beat her head into the concrete floor, which caused multiple facial fractures. And if that was not enough, he then slit her throat 3 to 4 times, leaving her to die in her basement that morning. I believe that Mr. Pennington was surprised when we arrived at his door and told him that Marty Hill was still alive. I don't believe Mr. Pennington thought that he would be caught.
We always have a little saying that the trauma surgeons save these patients' lives, but we have the opportunity to get them back to living their lives. The first time I met Marty, she had been in the hospital for about a week. Her brain was stunned and in shock. She could walk, but it wasn't pretty. Her feet were very far apart. She couldn't put her feet together and stand still without falling over. She had some issues with her vision. She had difficulty with her hearing, difficulty with her memory, difficulty with processing things. She would change topics at the speed of light.
The attack was very difficult for both Stephen and Mackenzie, Marty's kids. Stephen is very protective over his mother. He lives in Houston, and he flew up that same evening, and he took it very hard. He actually cleaned the blood off of the floor of Marty's house. He wouldn't let anybody in the house. He didn't want anybody to see her blood all over the house.
I grew up a lot through the whole thing. I spent my 16th birthday in the hospital, and I remember her giving me a card, and her handwriting on the card was something that really made it real for me. Her handwriting just didn't look like her handwriting. It was almost like she had to start over, like being a kid again and build up to where she is now.
Marty's daughter, Mackenzie, played a huge role in Marty's recovery. I feel that Mackenzie's biggest role was Marty could feel like a mother. I have a responsibility. I have things that I need to get done for my daughter.
What comes after you start feeling better physically is the unseen trauma, the emotion of realizing what happened to you. So after she'd left the hospital and gone home to my mom's, it became more about the emotional trauma that had to start healing.
At that point, I was still just processing it. How someone that seems perfectly fine, perfectly normal, could be that, could be that violent.
Brian Pennington had been arrested for attempted first-degree murder. My goal was to put Mr. Pennington in prison for as long as our legal system would allow. The most important thing that we had was the DNA evidence on Mr. Pennington's genes. We also had facial scratches on his cheeks that he advised were from a pit bull. They were strong evidence for us, but defense attorneys can always find ways to try to cause reasonable doubt.
The frustrating part about this investigation is that we absolutely have no motive that we are aware of.
There was no theft that occurred from Marty's house. She had money laying out. Her purse was laying out. He did not take it. There was no sexual assault. There was no history that they had spoken since the work had been conducted at her house in late August. While preparing to go to court, we did more background investigation on Brian. I checked our computer database and noticed that Mr. Pennington had a prior police record.
I believe he had over 60 contacts with law enforcement officers. He was involved in several domestic violence incidents where injuries occurred to wives, to girlfriends. Battering women was nothing new to him.
Jessica Pennington was a key witness to this case. She provided her husband an alibi at the time of the initial interview by the detectives. She told the detectives that her husband was home during the entire time frame of the attack. That was going to be hard to get around in front of a jury.
The night before the preliminary hearing, Marty was very nervous about seeing Brian Pennington. She was also very nervous about what she was going to say, what the attorneys, what questions they were going to ask.
The pressure was tremendous because, in our opinion, Brian was and is a very dangerous individual. And if we failed at the preliminary hearing, he would be released. He would be free. I was very concerned about Marty's physical health. When I first met her, she was struggling just to walk and sit down in a chair. And one of my concerns was, even as aggressive of a prosecution that we were going to have, I didn't want to cause her more emotional harm or physical harm. The other concern was her memory. We knew that if she could identify Mr. Pennington as her attacker in the courtroom, that we could get a conviction. The problem was, with all of the injuries to her, we didn't know if she would be able to do that.
We were in the courtroom and they brought Brian in and they seated him to the far right of our family. It was very emotional and unbelievable. It just made you want to cry. So it was very hard to see him. Brian Pennington had no one on his side of the courtroom. Not even his mother, okay?
He always stared straight at the wall, and he never looked around until Marty walked in the door. The only time he moved his head from straight forward was when she walked in the room, and I saw his eyes go like this, almost like he saw a ghost. I will always remember that. I could see it and feel it, that he couldn't believe she was walking down that aisle, gonna go up and speak.
When Marty first walked into the courtroom, she was very slow, she was a little bit hunched over, and I was concerned if she was going to be able to make it through this. I've always told her just to focus on me. You and I are going to have a conversation, block everybody else out. It's going to be you and me. We can do this.
I remember while I was speaking that I could, out of the corner of my eyes, kind of see him glancing at me.
Something about the basement.
It was still hard to process because I'm seeing this person that had come to work for me and I thought he was fine.
He showed no emotion. I felt he was very detached from the situation, and it didn't bother him that he had almost killed a woman. The defendants that detach and show no emotion are the ones that frighten us the most.
It's still too hard to understand someone that you felt like you knew was capable of something like that.
I held my breath until she identified Brian as the person that attacked her, because I was very concerned with the traumatic brain injury, with everything she'd been through, if she was going to be able to do that, and she did it.
I felt that it was important that I got up there and could do what they needed me to do.
I smiled at her. I wanted her to know she did a great job. One of the other keys to the case was Jessica Pennington. I thought that she would be a very hostile witness and would testify in his behalf, say he was home that entire time frame. We were able to get her alone with the detectives and tell her how important it was to tell the truth. I think the key factor with Jessica was learning how severely beaten Marty was and how close Marty came to dying. And I think Jessica, the human side of her, understood that and realized it was more important to tell the truth than to protect Brian. And Jessica Pennington broke down and at that time admitted to us that she had lied and that in fact her husband, Mr. Pennington, was not at home with her during the time of the attack.
I learned from Jessica that Brian had attacked her on numerous occasions, assaulted, and threatened her.
In the end, Jessica became one of our best witnesses against Brian. At the end of the preliminary hearing, the judge ruled there was enough evidence to take the case to trial. It didn't appear that Brian had a lot of fight left when it came to the case. And it was made clear to us through his defense counsel that he wanted to work out a deal. The issue with the deal was how long would he serve in the Kansas State prison system. We could go through the jury trial and get 38 years, or we could work out a plea and get less than that. A key factor in the evaluation was Marty. We knew that she still had physical issues, mental issues, and I believe that Marty wanted to work out a deal.
There was a day when she called me and said, it's hard enough for 12 people to decide where to go to lunch, let alone decide how to convict someone.
It took several months, but we finally agreed on 28.5 years. Because that was going to end it for Marty. She wouldn't have to testify. And also, I thought it was important for her children to have closure on this too.
The sentencing, we expected it to be brief and short and to the point, and for him to be convicted and sentenced.
I walked into the sentencing hearing. I looked at Brian Pennington. I looked at the defense counsel. And I knew something was wrong. At the sentencing hearing, Brian and his defense counsel were not speaking with one another. Brian looked angry, so I knew that there was an issue. We were told that Brian wanted to withdraw his plea. He wanted to go to trial. It was my perception that Brian had 6 weeks since the plea date to think about serving 28 years in prison. Keep in mind, he had not been alive for 28 years, so I don't think he could get his head around the fact that he would serve more time in prison than he had been on this earth. My initial thought was, I had told Marty it was going to be over today, and that may not happen. The courtroom was filled with tension. Many of Marty's family members were very upset.
Everyone who had traveled from miles and miles and spent a lot of money on plane tickets was like, oh my gosh, you know, he's gonna change his plea right here.
It was decided that we would go in court and that Brian would tell the judge the reasons why he wanted to withdraw his plea. Brian simply told him it was the pressure and that it was too much time. The judge tells him that those are not sufficient reasons to withdraw his plea. We then moved on to the victims' statements and their family members.
I was almost excited to be able to talk to him.
I will never understand why you did this to my mom. You put my entire family through something that no family should ever have to go through. And you put me through something that a 15-year-old especially should never have to go through.
I looked at him straight in the face the entire time I was talking. I got to tell him how strong our family was. And even though he pretended like he wasn't listening, he wouldn't look at me, I knew that he heard what I was saying. I finally felt powerful towards him.
The most powerful part to me was when Marty stood up and faced the man that tried to kill her. She said to Brian, I was nothing but nice to you. And asking him, why did you do this to me? And he just sat there, no response.
The judge asked Brian if he had anything to say before he gave him his sentence. The attorneys came back and said that he had nothing to say.
that he has the right to say nothing is very hard. It feels like he should at least owe us an explanation.
Hopefully one day he'll communicate why he did it. I think it would help us all understand that it wasn't just a random event, that there was some motive behind it, some reason why it happened.
The judge followed the plea agreement and sentenced Brian to 28.5 years in the Kansas prison system.
I felt like we had a big team working together that made things right. Great detectives, great attorney, great family support, great friends.
I'm so proud of my mom. I need to become more like her and the person that she is. I need to have her work ethic and her personality and just to be a likable person so that if anything like that happened to me, that I would be able to make it through it like she did. I'm so thankful for the people at my mom's work that stepped up. It wasn't just like someone is missing from work. It was that one of their friends hadn't shown up and they were wondering why. I think that the coworkers were definitely like my mom's angels.
I don't think any of us consider ourselves heroes in this. It's Marty's the hero. She could have decided this thing can beat me, and it's made her an amazing person.
I think the kickboxing, it initially started as just something to push myself a little further, working out. I knew that that was going to be a key role in getting back to my regular life. I do have scars. I have all across my neck still. I tend to probably pull my hair forward and cover it up. I still have tingling down the left side. My face feels like a mannequin from here on, and my ear's very tight. So it's always a reminder, for sure.
I think she's still dealing with the emotional part of it, that it's never going to be something that we can just put in the past, even though it's over with and he's in jail and everything, that it's still there.
I think about the attack and the event a lot. How is someone 26 and how do they get to a level that they could be that vicious and be capable of doing those things? If I could ask Pennington anything, it would be why or what were you doing? And yes, just why.
In January of 1978, I was 20 years old. I lived in the Chi Omega sorority house on the FSU campus in Tallahassee. I was happy, I was with my other friends, and Florida State was just a safe place to be. When I moved into the sorority house, my roommate was Karen Chandler.
When I was at FSU, it was very laid back. It was just a great time. Classes had been going on for about a week, and everyone was moved in to the house.
Saturday, January 14th, I walked home and I got in the sorority, and there were kids talking about, where they're going tonight, what are they doing, who they're dating, what party. And then I saw my book sitting on the trunk, and I said, I have a test on Monday. I'm going to go ahead and stay home and study tonight. My roommate Karen came in at the same time, and she had a sewing project she had to do. So she sat in her bed next to mine.
And we talked for a little while, and then Kathy was tired, so I just went ahead and decided to go to bed. It was maybe around midnight, maybe a little bit before midnight.
That night, I heard our bedroom door slam open. I was opening my eyes a little bit because it kind of brought me into consciousness. And I'm awake enough to know someone's there. As I'm opening my eyes more and focusing, he raised his arm and he had something in his hand. I thought it was a pipe or a stick. I didn't know what it was. He came down and hit me in the face. It just felt like pins and needles and knives in my face. My roommate Karen was now stirring, and he went over and hit her. I'm still awake and I'm moving. So he came back to my side of the bed, and as I see him raise his arm up, this bright light shone into our room. And this light was a car from one of the sorority sisters coming home from a late date. He got spooked and he left the room.
The next thing I remember is the feeling like I was being lifted downstairs. And I remember asking if Kathy was okay, and them saying, she's going to be okay, you need to worry about yourself.
While detectives tried to track a man who slipped into a sorority house. Most co-eds here terrified.
They put me on the stretcher, and there was all this noise. There were the lights from the police cars and the ambulance.
Police say he simply walked in through an unlocked door.
People talking and the radio squawking.
They say he was armed with a heavy oak log.
And I thought I was at a carnival because my mind went to somewhere I could understand. My name is Kathy Kleiner, and I was attacked by Ted Bundy.
The early morning hours of January the 15th, 1978, I got a call, and the call basically said, Sheriff, there's multiple murders and assaults on girls. They told me it was at the Chi Omega house. I was stunned. Before I could get myself settled into criminal investigator Ken Casares as my role as sheriff, I had to get over my personal thoughts about these could be my own daughters. I was there before Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler were brought out on gurneys. I said prayers for both of them as they passed me. I didn't know if they were alive or deceased at the time. They told me two were definitely deceased inside.
I knew I woke up in intensive care. I didn't have any idea for sure why I was there, but I knew something bad had happened. I had at least one skull fracture. I think every bone in my face was broken and my jaw was broken. I had a broken arm and I had a couple of fingers on my hand that were crushed. Maybe I had been in my room for a day or two, and my parents were afraid of what was going to be on the TV. So my dad said, before we turn on the TV, I need to tell you something. And he told me about Lisa and Margaret.
Margaret Bowman, 21, and Lisa Levy, 20, had been killed just down the hall from Karen and Kathy's room in the sorority house. They had both been strangled, beaten, and sexually assaulted.
I can't imagine how horrible that was for their parents.
And it was very hard because I really couldn't express my grief and my sorrow to their families.
My jaw was broken in 3 places, here, here, and here. It was hanging on this joint, the jaw. What they did was put my jaw back together and wire it shut.
In the hospital, Kathy could remember nothing about the attack. She says those memories have slowly come back to her over the years.
I remember the detectives were in my room, first off, before my family even showed up, asking me questions, but I was not able at all to help the detectives. It was just a big blur to me.
But it turned out the Chi Omega house had not been the only crime scene that night.
We were outside that evening when all of a sudden I get a radio communication from the sheriff's office that there is something going on at a duplex. A young lady who lived there alone, and the next door neighbor hearing some beating, some sounds. This is going on less than 6 blocks away. I sent an investigator there and found Cheryl Thomas on the floor in blood and had been beaten badly.
Cheryl Thomas was a dance major at FSU. Like the Chi Omega victims, she suffered severe head injuries and was taken to the hospital in a coma.
I thought, could this be the same individual? And I said, how? We've got such a police presence. How could that person go just a few blocks and strike again? It was inconceivable. I got a call from Colorado about an escaped criminal named Ted Bundy. I was familiar with the name. They said, do you know Ted Bundy? I said, I've heard of him.
Theodore Bundy, a suspect in the rape murder cases of at least 36 young women in California.
36 rapes and murders, mostly in the West, over a 7-year period.
They said, we don't know where he is.
Bundy was on the FBI's 10 most wanted list.
And I wrote his name down on a legal pad in my car, Ted Bundy. It was the first name associated with the murders in Tallahassee. Ted Bundy was known to lure women away with his charm and then abduct them or pick them up at a bus stop and say, can I give you a ride? I did not think that the method of operation of this case was anything near similar except for an attack on girls. So I did not take that at that time as serious.
When I woke up in the Tallahassee hospital, I couldn't really tell you who I was or where I was. I know I had head pain and my face was very swollen. My mom and dad had to tell me what had happened because I really did not know. I couldn't remember what happened, and they had to slowly break the news to me, Cheryl, you were attacked.
Cheryl's jaw was broken in 2 places, her shoulder dislocated, and she had 5 skull fractures, leaving her permanently deaf in her left ear.
I felt very grateful because obviously if I had not had the 2 neighbors next door to call that night when they heard me crying and a beating kind of sound, I know I would not have survived.
As the news sunk in across the FSU community, Cheryl remained in the hospital. Karen recovered at her parents' home nearby, and Kathy went home to South Florida.
I was flown down to Miami with my family. My parents took me to an oral surgeon and had to re-break my jaw because it was not going to be lined up correctly. So now I had to be wired shut for additional 9 weeks. It was so depressing. When you have your mouth wired shut, you have to always wear nail clippers on a necklace around your neck. Because if you ever start choking or anything, you have to be able to cut the wires and be able to breathe.
As Kathy and her fellow survivors healed, Sheriff Casares looked for ways to put the person who did this to them away, searching for clues in untraditional places.
I did a personal examination of Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy. When I examined both of the bodies, I found what I think was the most significant piece of evidence, and that was a bite mark. And that bite would potentially be able to be compared to whoever we found. To me, it was almost like he was leaving whoever it was a signature.
I think before Tallahassee and FSU was a cocoon, but that was sort of the shutting of a door in a way. That was the end of, we are safe.
That type of evil that encompassed me that night, I couldn't wrap my head around it.
It just seemed surreal. It didn't seem like it was possible. The innocence at Florida State was gone. The university had asked the fraternities for volunteers, and if a lady needed to go to the library or to campus or anywhere, one of us would go and escort her to wherever she was going. Men started sleeping in the lobbies of the dormitories. There were police patrolling all the time. For that month, no one knew if they were sitting next to the person that had committed the crime. I mean, if they couldn't tell you who did it, how could they tell you who didn't do it?
As January 1978 stretched on, police were stumped. Although they had bite mark evidence, they had no one to match it to.
Within a few weeks after the sorority sisters were murdered, we had information that a 12-year-old, Kimberly Leach, disappeared from her school. So we thought, could it be possible? But this was a 12-year-old girl. We're dealing with college students in a sorority.
Kimberly Leach disappeared from Lake City over an hour away. Her body later found by a nearby park. Fear of the unknown attacker pervaded the area until news broke of an arrest in Pensacola.
There was something on TV when the news came on.
Police arrested this 31-year-old man after a high-speed chase Wednesday morning in Pensacola, Florida. He claimed to be a Florida State University law student.
Pensacola police had pulled over a Volkswagen Beetle that was driving slowly, and the mysterious driver refused to give his name.
Came to find out, of course, that the vehicle was stolen from a location nearby to the sorority house.
In that Volkswagen, they found dozens of IDs and credit cards that had been stolen from around Tallahassee in the weeks before.
Then the identification came back. It was Ted Bundy. The moment I heard Ted Bundy, I had the flashbacks, of course, of the phone call, and that's exactly what we had. We had Ted Bundy who came to our town.
If those who link him with dozens of sex slayings are right, Theodore Robert Bundy is one of the most savage killers in history.
Mr. Bundy had been a very prolific serial killer for many, many years. It is very unusual for Mr. Bundy to leave a survivor.
Ted Bundy's murder spree out west ended when he went to prison in 1976. But at the end of 1977, he had escaped and made his way to Florida. Immediately after his arrest, he became a suspect in both the FSU and Kimberly Leach attacks.
We know that he got here somewhere in the vicinity of January the 8th. He rented a boarding room in a boarding house adjacent to the Florida State University campus.
Bundy was at home on a college campus. Around the time of his crimes out west, Bundy had attended college and even law school.
When Mr. Bundy was in school, he took jobs working for political campaigns and apparently did an extraordinarily good job. There was absolutely no indication that he was the serial killer that he ultimately turned out to be.
His charm, his wit, his intelligence, his charisma, everything about him made him different than all the other serial killers.
The first photo I saw of Ted Bundy after they arrested him, he didn't look like a serial killer. He looked normal.
The survivors learned more about who Ted Bundy was and the brutality of the crimes he was suspected of committing.
His history was a shock. I think when I learned about those women, it's just an immense sadness. There are all these families that are devastated.
In the months after the attacks, while the Florida authorities were building their case, the survivors slowly began to move forward with their lives. For Karen Chandler, that surprisingly meant moving back into the Chi Omega house.
When I came back, they gave me space. It wasn't like they treated me as a special China doll that they couldn't talk to. I felt like everyone treated me pretty much like they had treated me before. So life just sort of continued on like I had never left.
Cheryl, the former dance student, was now suffering from balance issues and didn't know what her future would look like.
I knew I couldn't hear again, but I asked the neurologist, would I ever be able to dance again? He said, that's totally up to you. So then I knew that I had an option of train my body all over again, or I won't dance again. I made my decision I was going to go back and get my degree.
Cheryl moved to Texas and studied ballet at another university. But for Kathy, life took a different turn.
Life totally changed for me. I did not go back to college. I was married 6 months after the attack. My parents thought I needed someone to take care of me and to be sure that nobody came in the middle of the night and attacked me again. And I was okay with that.
But as much as they wanted to, they couldn't put Bundy behind them. To bring him to justice, they needed to come face to face with their attacker.
We wanted, more than anything, to make sure if this was the guy that did it, we want him locked up, that he never has the opportunity to hurt another woman.
FBI agents and Florida police are questioning a man by the name of Theodore Robert Bundy.
With every passing day, the media grew increasingly fascinated with alleged serial killer Ted Bundy.
He will remain in Pensacola under tight security until authorities can determine if he will be charged with the Florida State University murders.
I feel like they were so focused on Ted Bundy, which I'm sure Ted Bundy enjoyed the media, that they forgot about the women.
As Florida authorities investigated Bundy, they first questioned why his method of attack would have changed.
He typically was organized. He would plot, pick up, and then abduct the young lady. And here, it was obvious that he had gotten disorganized.
They developed a theory that Bundy had originally stalked and targeted Cheryl Thomas.
There had been a guy that I'd seen ride his bicycle by my house. Ted Bundy looks similar, so I sometimes wonder if maybe that was him.
He had no doubt cased that place out. And we believed that Mr. Bundy went to Cheryl Thomas's residence. And when he got there, apparently there was a car that had broken down right in front, and there was a man there working on the car. He found that, kind of got spooked. He then went to the Kyle Mega house.
And when his attack at the sorority was interrupted, Bundy returned to Cheryl's.
You know, I compared Ted Bundy to a killing machine, like a shark, because the shark is just feeding in a frenzy off of whatever is available. Just like the shark has the need to eat, he had the need to murder.
Their case intensified with an eyewitness who put Bundy at the sorority house.
One of the Kyle Mega sisters, Nita Neary, came home that night after being out on a date. She came in through the back door of the sorority house, and she saw a man coming from the upstairs area down the stairway.
That would have been unusual for Nita to see a man because no men were allowed upstairs in the sorority house.
She did not see him full face on, but she saw a profile of him. He opened the front door and immediately exited the sorority house.
Neary identified Bundy from a lineup, and as the case came together, investigators still had that key piece of evidence to analyze.
We crafted a search warrant to use to search Mr. Bundy's mouth and obtain models of his teeth to compare against the bite mark impression that was left.
The search warrant for his mouth probably was the first in the nation's history. So I went to his cell one evening. I told him he's coming with me, and he went with me to my dentist's office. The doors opened up. He saw that we were in a dental office. He immediately started screaming, "Where's my attorney? I want my attorney. You can't do this." He knew exactly what we were going to be doing. Once we read him the search warrant for his mouth, he realized that we could use force. He sat down in the dental chair, he opened his mouth, said, "Do what you have to do, Ken. You know I'm not a violent person."
The state asked 4 dental experts to compare Bundy's molds to the marks.
All 4 of them concluded that Mr. Bundy was the one that left the bite mark.
We were confident going to the grand jury with the evidence that we had.
There was an indictment last night in the aftermath of a brutal crime in Tallahassee, Florida, and what was unusual about the indictment was how it was delivered.
I have copies of the indictment to give each of you.
We had print media, radio media, television media.
Step out, Mr. Bundy.
And they were able to view the indictment reading that night.
What do we have here, Ken? Let's see. You always say an indictment, all right? Why don't you read it to me? Let's read it. Let's go. Theodore Robert Bundy, you are charged, indictment, 2 counts burglary and 2 counts murder in the first degree, 3 counts attempted murder in the first degree.
He was obviously not very happy. I did not let it deter me.
Said Theodore Robert Bundy did make an assault upon Karen Chandler and or Kathy Kleiner.
Not surprisingly, the former law student took an active role in his defense.
Mr. Bundy took depositions from the witnesses in the case himself. It's very unusual, but Mr. Bundy did have legal training.
I think he was acting as the lawyer that he always wanted to be. Since I didn't remember anything about the attack, I think that was helpful. But my feeling at that time was, I don't want to show him any fear because I don't want him to think anything about him bothers me, is under my skin, scares me.
He was sitting there looking at me, and I looked at him, and I didn't take my eyes off of him. And he had this smirk on his face. It kind of made my stomach sick. But also, I knew I was walking out, and he wasn't, and that gave me some power.
I felt like I had done my job, I had answered his questions, and I hope I gave him absolutely no satisfaction.
Months passed as the case wound its way toward trial. Down in Miami, Kathy Kleiner struggled to put herself back out in the world.
After I got attacked, I was afraid of men. It was something that I didn't want to have control me, and I went to work at a lumber yard because I figured that's where I'm going to see the most men, and it worked. That experience helped me a lot.
Kathy would soon need that newfound confidence. The survivors were set to testify against Bundy, but this time, his life was in their hands.
To know I was going to have to testify, I think I just needed to build up my resolve and know that this was going to happen and be prepared as much as I could for it. We locked eyes once again, and I stared at him.
Why do you think people are so fascinated with Ted Bundy? For more on the case, go to Facebook at 48 Hours.
I think I always knew that I was going to have to testify in court if it went to trial.
Victim in this case.
Get away from here. You know you're not supposed to be here.
Excuse me. There was a total media circus.
Get!
We'll be standing by.
Prosecuting Attorney Larry Simpson.
And it was the first major case that actually was broadcast live.
Evaluating it.
As it was actually going down in the courtroom.
Only one camera fixed on a tripod tapes the courtroom proceedings. His 20 television crews from around the country have been covering the trial.
Get a front row seat, you can get it all there.
Well, I think Mr. Bundy was playing to the cameras.
Robert, my name's Ted Bundy.
He got a real kick out of it.
At trial, Bundy again took an active role on his defense team.
Exhibits entered on this motion.
By participating in his own defense, Bundy and his attorneys hoped to convince the jury that he was intelligent, articulate, and innocent, a victim of circumstances.
Bundy had a lot of interaction with the judge. He argued his own motions as good as a lawyer could, I think.
Young women packed the courtroom every day to see the star defendant.
Every time he turns around, I kind of get that feeling, no, you know, he's gonna get me next.
As lead prosecutor, Larry Simpson felt pressure
At or near the cause of death.
to make sure Bundy was put away forever.
The cases out west were not particularly strong cases.
By George, we know.
We needed to finish the job in Florida.
The survivors felt that pressure too, as Cheryl, Karen, and Kathy each took the stand.
I felt it was important for the jury to see a real person who had been subjected to what Ted Bundy did.
I had 5 skull fractures and multiple contusions in my head.
It was just my mission to tell my story. And I just really didn't want to look at him, didn't want to talk to him, didn't want anything to do with him.
The defense asked, is this the man you saw attack you that night in your room at Chi Omega? And I had to say I don't know, because I never saw his face. I wanted to help put the nail in that coffin, to put him away, to help the other girls who couldn't do it. But I couldn't help.
And she was weaving it.
Though the survivors couldn't identify Bundy from that night, someone else could. Sorority sister Nita Neary.
Do you recall the man that you saw at the door of the Chi Omega house on the morning of January 15, 1978?
Yes, I do.
Would you point him out for us, please? The man in the dark suit with the red tie?
Perhaps the prosecution's most damning evidence was that bite mark left on one of the victims.
This is a photograph of the bite mark. And as you can see, there's a ruler in place. And this is what the forensic dentist did in court.
They made the marks.
You can actually place this model right on the photograph, and you've got it coming in like this, laying down, and then he turned his head slightly and did it again. It fits like a glove.
But bite mark analysis was a new and relatively uncertain science, and the ever-smiling Bundy seemed confident as the trial came to a close.
Of course, I was worried when it went to the jury, but I knew in my heart and by the evidence that was there that he's the one that actually murdered my friends.
The jury was out a little less than 7 hours and returned a verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty as charged.
The verdict was guilty as charged on all counts.
He was convicted, and now whatever sentence he got couldn't be bad enough as far as I was concerned.
It is ironic that he ended up in Florida because we were a very active death penalty state.
It is hereby imposed the death penalty.
He was sentenced to death on my birthday. I don't believe the death penalty should be a willy-nilly kind of thing, but if he had gotten out, there were women that were going to die. I have no doubt in my mind.
Following the FSU trial, Bundy was also found guilty of murdering 12-year-old Kimberly Leach and received another death sentence.
After the trial was over, I felt that it was just going to be all over and no more in the news or anything. But that didn't happen. It was probably just crazy for me to think that.
As Bundy sat on death row, his notoriety only grew. Books and TV programs came out, focusing on his good looks and charm. Instead of rejecting it, Kathy decided to embrace it.
I read as much as I could about Ted Bundy, watched all his movies, because I think by learning about him, it has helped me move forward because I wanted to just disassociate myself so that he wasn't part of me anymore.
In 1981, 3 years after the attacks, Kathy had a son, Michael.
I didn't want him to know that I had been scared, that I had been attacked. I just wanted to be a normal mom with a normal kid. One night, I was putting him to bed, and he looked up at me, and he touched my face. And he said, "Mommy, what happened to your face right there?" And I told him that a bad man came into my house one night and had hurt me.
You just don't grasp that at a young age. You don't really get it, but you kind of do, and you just feel like, you know, I'm not going to let anybody hurt you. I felt that it was important to keep her safe. She was such a loving person. How could somebody do that to you? Sorry.
And I think in his mind, he always carried that it could happen again. And would I be there, you know, to help my mom?
How do you deal with traumatic events? For more of Kathy Kleiner's story of survival, go to 48hours.com.
For most of the 1980s, Ted Bundy sat on Florida's death row, appealing his convictions. In that time, Kathy Kleiner went through a divorce and focused on her young son, Michael.
I was a single mom for 5 years, and he and I grew up together. We were very, very close.
Growing up, my mom was the most loving, caring, affectionate, happy person. She never let what happened to her get to her.
Kathy had grown accustomed to projecting a tough exterior. But that softened in 1987 when an old high school friend came back into her life.
Over the years, I thought about Kathy now and then. Kathy's very special, and you could tell she was very special back then.
So I called him, and he came over one day for lunch on a weekend, and basically never left. I mean,
I felt energy from Kathy right away when we first saw each other. It was just her smile, and she really looked in your eyes, but happy eyes. All that together just was like, boom. When Kathy told me a little bit about the attack by Ted Bundy, it just kind of blew me away. She would cry about it. I wanted to take away all her pain, and you couldn't take away this pain.
In her family, Kathy found happiness, and she leaned on them for support as Bundy's appeals finally ran out.
At the end, he was bargaining for his life. He started confessing to murders. He confessed to 30 murders. And now he was trying to give information, but it was vague.
I'll tell you where more women are buried. Please don't kill me. And I can imagine those being the last words that he heard from his victims. Please don't kill me.
Serial killer Ted Bundy is scheduled to die in Florida's electric chair at 7 o'clock this morning.
There was the atmosphere of a public hanging as hundreds of singing, chanting death penalty supporters gathered.
When it happened, we got a call.
3, 2, 1, second!
We had TV on, and at that point we saw the white flag that they hold and wave when someone has been electrocuted. Scott and I were sitting on our little sofa in my condo, and I cried, and I cried, and I cried for all the victims that could not see this.
Long after surviving Ted Bundy, Kathy is speaking publicly about her experiences, hoping it might help others.
I think by telling my story, it has helped to heal me, but I feel that it also helps people to hear that I have been through something so horrific, and I've come out the other side. I want people to know, no matter what they've gone through, that they too can do it.
There's no one way to heal from trauma. Karen and Cheryl feel like they've talked about Ted Bundy enough.
I was a victim until I walked out of that hospital. I was a survivor until he was executed. We got to come up with something that's after that. It's not part of me anymore.
I want to be more than Cheryl Thomas that was attacked by Bundy. I want to just be Cheryl Thomas. I got married and I had 2 wonderful children. I got my master's at Gallaudet University and worked with the hearing impaired in dance.
I've had a 40-year marriage. I have 2 wonderful self-sustaining children. I have 3 wonderful grandchildren. I really don't think about Bundy anymore.
Kathy's journey takes her back to Tallahassee for the first time in over 40 years. She's come, in part, to thank former Sheriff Ken Casares.
Kathy.
He's someone I've thought about over the years and someone who has a good memory.
You're here. Yeah. I'm seeing you again. I can't believe it.
Thank you so much.
Don't thank me.
I'm looking forward to doing this. This is something I needed to do.
Together, Kathy and Ken return to the Chi Omega house.
Totally different. It's weird. The sorority house looks so different. It doesn't bother me like I thought it would.
And your room was on the back side. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
It's okay to be here. I'm okay. And I'm with Ken, so he's given me strength.
Well, thank you.
Through everything, life goes on. You have to keep it going.
This case is about probably over 100 victims that lost their lives because of Mr. Bundy.
As time moves forward, the hope is that it will be the women, not Bundy, who are remembered.
He's not to be glorified. He's to be damned.
They were important people. They were people just like me.
Living, breathing people that had futures, and they're gone. And we only remember this inhuman thing.
For Kathy and Karen, the sorority sisters they lost are always with them.
I think about them occasionally when I'm with my grandchildren or when I had children. I wonder what their lives would have been like, what they would have done.
I feel that because I survived Ted Bundy and there were so many victims that didn't, I don't want to take that opportunity I was given and not do good with it. I want to be sure that I keep going for them.
Ted Bundy confessed to at least 30 murders, but it is believed he may have killed over 100 women in at least 6 states. Did a couple's massive home renovation project lead to murder?
Did you guys get into an argument?
Is it possible that without this house, Shanti might still be alive?
I think that's completely true.
48 Hours, next on CBS.